Today we're going to talk about using a router table. A bit is turning up to 30,000 times a minute, so it's turning extremely fast. It has cutting edges. You can see the carbide that's been attached to the steel on both sides. It has a shouldering behind the cutting bit to give it some support. This one turns counterclockwise, so as the wood comes in, it has to have material to go into the wood. So you're cutting through the cutter like this. I've got the power turned off. I'm going to change the cutter itself to a different profile. Some of them come in with a ball bearing that follows the edge of the material. Some of them come in without a ball bearing that you have to have a fence in order to guide. You can also use a fence so it comes off of the fence onto the ball bearing and then back onto the fence. Some of them are 1/2 inch shafts, some of them are 1/4 inch shafts. It all depends on the individual cutter and the application you're using. Okay, so power is off. We're going to take the insert out. Okay, 1/4 turn. There's just a wrench with 2 pins to take the insert out. On this end, it raises the whole router and the cutter that's in the router. I'm going to raise it so I can put 1 wrench on the top nut and 1 wrench on the bottom nut in order to take the bit out. You have to unlock the nut twice because there's an internal collet . There's an internal collet that is tapered, that's pulled down into a tapered shaft. So as it pulls down, it tightens up on the bit that it's around. You can see this one is for a 1/4 inch shaft. This one is for a 1/2 inch shaft. We're going to use a 1/4 inch shaft in this application. We're going to use a Roman OG bit. It has a small bearing. It has a concave, a convex, and a square shoulder on the bit to put a profile on the edge of a board. We're going to make sure that it is super tight, traveling at 30,000 revolutions a minute. You do not want it to come loose. We're going to put our insert back in. 1/4 turn. It locks it in place. We're going to run this cutter at 2 or 3 passes for the profile so that if there's a bad spot in the profile, it takes it out on the first pass and it doesn't blow it out on the finished pass. We're going to lock the cutter in position. For this application, I'm going to use the ball bearing, but I'm also going to use the fence. So it comes off the fence, onto the ball bearing, and back onto the fence. So I'm going to set my fence exactly in line with the ball bearing. I'm going to take a piece of wood, put it up against the edge, bring my fence up to the ball bearing and the piece of wood, lock it in place. It doesn't have to be 90 degrees to the bit as long as it's in line with the ball bearing, because that can be done anywhere around the entire ball bearing. Okay. So the wood is going to come through this way. The cutting profile is going to cut here on this edge, and then it's going to carry on. Now that we have our fence set up in line with the edge of the ball bearing, and we've got the height of the blade set up, now we're going to set up so that we have this clamped up in place up against the fence. And the way we do that is a feather board. A feather board is basically a board that has cuts in it, and we set it up so that the cuts are facing in, so as the board comes in, it's actually compressing the piece of wood on those cuts, and it holds the piece of wood nice and tight up against the fence. I'm going to put one on one side and one on the other. I'm going to take the guard that goes over the blade off for now. I'm going to use a couple of clamps to clamp it in place. Okay, now it's holding it up against the fence, so as it comes through it's going to stay up against the fence and my profile will stay more consistent. Now I'm also going to put a feather board to hold it down in place so it also can't ride up as it goes through the machine. I'm going to clamp a feather board on the table itself to hold the piece of wood in place so that as it's going through the cutter, it's also being held down in place. Move a little bit closer. Okay. So now we're ready to go. I'm going to use 2 push sticks. Okay. As it's going through, to keep my hands away from the cutter, and I'm going to just push it right past the blade. I'm not going to start it up against the cutter, I'm going to start it away from the material. I'm going to plug my machine back in, making sure there's nothing close. Going to turn it on. I'm going to wait until it stops. This is the first pass. The second pass, I'm going to go higher so I can get more of the profile on it and start with the shoulder showing through. It's done exactly the same. We'll do a finished cut on that end. I'm going to raise it up for most of the shoulder on the bit to come through, and one last pass. the profile in the finished shape across the material. Cut.